Thanks. So yeah, my name is Sean Smith. I'm the Director of Architecture at a company called SecurityScorecard. SecurityScorecard goes and collects a lot of information on the internet, either directly through active scanning or from third parties. We then take that to construct customers' digital footprints and surface a bunch of issues for them and try to distill that down to a letter grade around what their public security posture is. But I'm not really here to talk about what SecurityScorecard does. I'm here to talk about some of the information underneath. So, there are a lot of companies that go and collect information on the internet. All this data is generally available for the right price, and in many cases, the right price is $0, especially if you're a researcher. So, what sort of things can we do with it? So, some additional constraints. All data that I'm going to pull up is going to be found with the domain name. I'm not here to talk about showdown.io, where, of course, I can search for things and turn up all sorts of things on the internet with Showdown. And so all data must be acquired without triggering any packets towards a target. So there are a lot of tools where you can, type in a domain or whatnot, and it'll go and do a scan for you. I'm not here to talk about any of those. I'm here to talk about what data sets that people are collecting that are just sitting on some server somewhere at rest that anyone can just go and pour through. So lots of people are using this today, so researchers are obviously using these because they're the ones producing these data sets. There's the security ratings space, which SecurityScorecard is in, that is using all this data to put forth companies' public security postures. And cyber insurance companies are using this data to dictate how much companies are going to pay them for a cyber insurance policy and more. So who may benefit from this? If you're on a red team, maybe you want to go and look through some of this information to collect some information before you go and engage a target. On the blue team side, perhaps you're interested in what the internet knows about you because they're using it to sort of evaluate some of your work, in a sense. And if you're just a researcher, someone who likes looking at data, you can quickly go through some of this data and check your hypothesis or quickly gauge the potential impact of some exploiting the internet when it comes out without actually having to go and collect that information yourself and do it over a period of months so you can actually see trending data. All right, so first is, of course, DNS. DNS is the cornerstone of the internet. Of course, you can find out a lot of things about an organization from their DNS. Are individuals going and collecting vast quantities of DNS information? Yes, so Rapid7 is the primary large data source that we use for DNS information. So they do both reverse DNS scans, where they're just scanning PTR records on the IP4 space every month, and they're feeding that and a bunch of other things into forward DNS scans. And so they're sitting on this vast trove of DNS information, which anyone can go through. And then, so their files are actually pretty large. So for more ad hoc stuff, I actually use this tool called Security Trails, which is essentially another one of those SaaS products where you can just go and put in a search string. And so, for example, I can put SecurityScorecard into that, and of course it'll give me back a bunch of subdomains. Everyone will have subdomains. This isn't complete, so not all these data sets are not necessarily going to be complete, but they have a lot of information. Well, let's see what some interesting things I can pull up are. So, for example, when going through this information at one point, I stumbled across these records for Ohio Children's Hospital. So I was looking at whether or not organizations had their MX records set up correctly. So from here, I found out that this organization has a number of MX records set up. So it looks like they've actually migrated through several different email providers over the course of the years, with the latest one here being Outlook. So it looks like they're on Outlook right now, but they have all these older ones here. And then going through, looking at historical data for that first one, ohiomail.org, which is presumably them self-hosting their own email at one point. So using this tool, I see that the last time they saw any record for that was like 2 years ago. It's like, huh, so actually, of course, that is available for registration right now. So conceivably, like I could go and register that. And while in this case, it's very unlikely that I'll get their email because of the prior AVMX, like what misconfigurations do other companies have? Are there some where they have failed to remove entries that no longer resolve to something that actually have higher priority, where I could go and register that and then just happen to get an email sent to them? All right, and this tool also has Txt Records. I find Txt Records fascinating. There's a lot of really interesting information. This is really hard to see here, so I had to cheat briefly and actually do a dig to bring that up in a usable fashion. So for DNS, like I'm not just finding information about an organization. I'm finding out what other organizations that organization is dealing with. So from the MX record, like it's very easy to see who's hosting their mail. And then for Txt Records, I can find out a lot of information. So for example, here, it indicates that SecurityScorecard is using a company called Valamail for setting up their SPF, and I know Valamail is an organization that helps other organizations roll out DMARC policies. So I know SecurityScorecard is using that. And then like going down farther, there's this interesting one. So there's Atlassian domain verification. So, and then it turns out, so this actually means that SecurityScorecard is using Jira as a cloud product. And this is a pretty common practice actually. So going through a lot of data, like I've seen stuff for Adobe, because Adobe has their online Photoshop product and they use the strategy. Cisco and Citrix, Dropbox has done it for organizations. Facebook does it for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why offhand. Global Sign, whether or not someone signed up for Have I Been Pwned for their organization. SendCloud, almost all the email providers to prove that you own a domain. And like the list just goes on and on. And then when doing some investigation, so this is another interesting one. I turned up this subdomain, which resolves to a private internal DNS number. I was like, huh, I wonder how many people do that. And then using that tool, like I can search for 10.0.0.1 or whatever. And so based on the information at rest, there's like 7,137 results. Actually, I kind of wonder now if I could just do a range and see how many results there were. But this shows that a number of organizations are sort of leaking their internal DNS through external means. And so what could somebody conceivably do with that? All right, so to summarize DNS, DNS contains lots of information about you as well as the companies you do business with. Some people are really slow to clean up DNS after migrating, and some people are leaking internal IP addresses. So I'm going to move on to TLS certificates, which is another area I find really interesting. So first there's certificate transparency. So certificate transparency is this thing that Google has rolled out as a response to them being frustrated with certificate authorities misissuing certificates. So as you may be aware, like recently, Symantec doesn't issue certificates anymore, and other certificates are trusted. And before that happened, Google essentially forced them to put all their certificates through certificate transparency. And now, actually, they require all certificate authorities to essentially have certificates pushed into certificate transparency logs. But as a result, that means that certificate transparency logs are now essentially a log of all the certificates that should be exposed on the internet. So I can, type in securityscorecard.com and I get a list of certificates that have been issued for us within our logged in chronological order. So So it seems here that recently we had a bunch of certificates issued. So I can go through and actually look at some of the information here. So these are Cloudflare SSLs because SecurityScorecard happens to be using Cloudflare and another association of companies. And then going through like Cloudflare issues, certificates with a lot of SANs, and there we are nestled between Russian ballet history and Bike Shop Italia. Did I miss a source? So there's an organization called Census which sort of does the same thing and allows you to do a full text search. So I can go in and get the sort of same results in there, and you'll also see that there's certificates issued by Amazon as well. All right, but you can also do more interesting things because it's a log and like all the details that are in the log. People are starting to use certificate transparency to detect phishing domains because you're trying to evoke a certain amount of trust, that you're trying to spoof a URL. That means that you're likely to have part of someone's organizational name in that URL. So like, sure enough, like I can search Census for things that have PayPal, and I'll get interesting things like someone registered your account, PayPal has been blocked. lavenderiaamerica.com or this other PayPal one. And you'll notice that these are Let's Encrypt certificates because like Let's Encrypt doesn't really do a whole lot of verification. They don't think it's their job, and I largely agree with that. Their primary purpose is just to have more secure communication on the internet. All right, and then past certificate transparency, there are actually a number of organizations that are actively scanning the internet for TLS services. So there are most services that use TLS are on common ports. They're going through and scanning those and knocking on those doors and seeing who responds. And so Rapid7 is, of course, doing that as well. SecurityScorecard we're doing it ourselves as well. So I think there's a lot of interesting information there. And remember, it's not just HTTPS that uses TLS, it's all sorts of other things. And all right, here's my Census slide. So Census, so you can search, and you'll actually bring up hosts that certificates are found on. And so I think an interesting property of TLS certificates and the usage of them on the internet. So you can query things by IP on services, and if they give back a TLS certificate, the TLS certificate is going to have all the names that the certificate is useful for in the certificate itself. So that is actually an association between an IP address and an organization, because you happen to have a TLS certificate that references your organization on that. And at SecurityScorecard, this actually comes up fairly frequently with some of our customers. We have customers that come and talk to us, and they're like, this IP doesn't belong to us. This is some third party that we used like 3 years ago and that we no longer do business with. And it's like, well, there's still a certificate that you used to use on that host right now. So if that wasn't cleaned up, what else wasn't cleaned up on that machine? And that's generally a good conversation, and the customer is usually like, oh, I don't know. And so they go back to the hosting provider and try to figure out like what's still on there, what they used it for in the first place, because in many cases, like turnover, like who knows what that thing was used like 3 years ago. I can barely remember what some machine I set up a year ago still does. And then get that cleaned up. All right, so that's an overview of what we're using for TLS for. So certificate transparency can show who's issuing certificates for you, or reveal potential phishing attacks or other things. And then active TLS scans can reveal associations between an organization and some random IP on the internet. All right, now web scanning. Web scanning is an area that we've been spending a lot of more time in recently because information, or like everybody has a website. There are tons of people crawling those websites. There's tons of information on those websites. So there's two big repositories of freely available web crawls that I'm currently aware of. So one is Common Crawl, and the next is the HTTP archive, where the HTTP archive is actually the data set that powers the Wayback Machine that they just recently decided to give people access to, and you can actually query this through the Google Big Data platform. So you don't even need to download this and do it yourself. Like all the data's there. And then additionally, we work with this company called, their name isn't actually here, so Netagraph, which is a research organization that's more interested in the associations between a website and their third parties. So they're largely privacy oriented, but still pretty interesting. So what sort of things might you be interested in when looking at web crawl data? So one thing we do, we take a look at the prevalence of web header of response headers. So this is just like the top headers that I saw were some period data. In our cases, we're largely looking for things like X powered by to see what technologies are in use, or the security headers here. So for example, maybe you're interested in what ASP versions are essentially announcing themselves on the internet. So this is somebody else's research where they took a set of scans and actually ordered by the prevalence of the version number here. Maybe you're interested in the number of websites that have vulnerable JavaScript. And yes, that is hovering near 80%. Or maybe you're privacy oriented and you're interested in what organizations are setting persistent tracking cookies so that they can track your activity across the internet. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's tons and tons of things that you can do with web crawling data. I think it's a really big gold mine for taking a look at what's available there. Obviously, your footprint is available there, since the web crawling is going to pick up your sites that are essentially available and linked to on the internet, whether or not you know about them or not. Someone else certainly does. As well as potentially covering a subset of services you use. All right, so mapping it all out. So one of the things I did with this data is, okay, so I can draw a relationship between one organization and another organization, which means that I can draw a relationship between one organization, their intermediary, and another organization. It's like, why don't I just map all this out? So this is actually NFL.com and the services they use spiraling out to the services they use. And so, I mean, there are some pretty obvious clusters here. So like Google's over here because everybody uses Google for email and everything else. Interestingly, like a number of people in this chain are using Box.com. There is DoubleClick, so a number of people in this chain are using DoubleClick for ads. A number of things with Global Sign. Yeah, and then I can actually do the reverse. So this is the number of people that actually rely on NFL.com. And not surprising, it is all the NFL sports teams. And then so here's another one. So this is Atlassian. So this is a little bit more sparse. But you still see Google.com is pretty prevalent. DoubleClick is pretty prevalent. And then reversing this, Atlassian clearly has a lot of customers that are easily able to be picked out just through some very, very simple techniques. All right, so wrapping up, There is tons of historical data available on your digital footprint on the internet. This includes services that you're using and third parties you're interacting with. It's really accessible and easily processable in large volumes. So let's think about what other people could possibly do with it. That's it. Thank you. So quick question. Sorry, I can't actually hear it from here.
You mentioned about DNS and phishing attacks and everything about that, how let's encrypt and how that phishing, right?
Sorry, I still can't actually hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, come closer, come closer.
So you mentioned
And or like if we have another, do we have another mic? No. Okay.
So you mentioned about DNS and phishing attacks and TLS and all that stuff. And is there any kind of graphs or charts to show who the registrars are for the ones that are registering those very similar domain names of the companies they're attacking? Because from my evidence and from my research, what I found is GoDaddy registers a huge portion of them, a massive portion of them.
So the question is there information around who the registrars are for the DNS stuff for things like phishing attacks and whatnot? I'm quite confident the answer is yes. I just haven't looked, and I haven't really looked into that area myself. But yeah, I'm 100% certain that the information is there. All right, cool. Thank you, everyone.